Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Solomon, if you just continue with the presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'll be introducing people to developing web applications using the MVC framework. There are several ways you can actually develop your web applications. There are so many ways you can actually develop your applications, but using the MVC framework comes with a lot of stuff. So I'll be introducing you guys on how to use the MVC framework for developing modern web applications. So on our table of contents, we'll get to know what MVC framework is all about, the features of MVC, the MVC architecture, which under the MVC architecture we'll talk about the view, the controller, the model. Then we'll talk about popular web frameworks that use MVC, then the advantages of MVC, like the key benefits on that's why would you use MVC, and then the disadvantages of using MVC. Then we'll talk about 3-tier architecture versus MVC, and then we'll summarize everything. So what is MVC framework? MVC simply means the model, view, and controller framework. It's actually an architectural pattern that separates an application into 3 main logical components, which is the model, the view, and then the controller. So that's why you have the abbreviation MVC. So from this diagram here, you can actually see the model, the view, and the controller. These 3 components work together to actually deliver this particular framework. And basically what happens is the view talks basically about the user interface. Then the model talks about the data, like your database and stuff behind, which includes the data logic and stuff. Then the controller is more like the middleman who controls both transactions, who binds both stuff together. But as we move forward, you get to understand it better. So the MVC architecture, the 3 important MVC components are the model. It includes all the data and its related logic. Then the view, that's your, in a normal language, view is more like the user interface, what the user sees. And then the controller is more like an interface between the model and the view components. So let's see how all these components work. We'll see them in details, so we'll get to understand them better. From this diagram here, you can actually see the model, which carries out the basic transactions when it comes to database, which is the CRUD, that's the CRUD, which is the create, read, update, and delete. Then you have the view, which is actually the presentation tier. That's what the user sees. Like, for example, if a user goes to a particular website, maybe he types bbc.com, that page that appears, that's the view. Then the controller is more like a business logic that controls everything that happens between the model and the view. Let's say, for instance, when a user opens bbc.com and clicks on a button, he's actually making a request, and the request could be a get, a put, or a post request. The controller takes that particular request, sends it down to the model. The model will now, let's say, for example, if it's actually a get request, that the user is actually requesting for a particular information, the model retrieves this from the database, and then it can actually send it straight to the view, which the view now displays to the user. So that's what this whole diagram is actually talking about. So we'll look at an example of the MVC architecture. From this diagram, you can actually see a user submits a request, let's say on Google, via a view. This is actually a view. This is actually the web page which the user sees, which is the view. The user types, maybe he wants to search for something. He types it, and then as soon as he types it, it is routed straight. It picks a particular controller. There's a controller that handles that particular request. The controller takes it, sends it down to the model. The model goes straight to the database, retrieves whatever information that that user is asking for, and then sends it down to the view, which the user actually sees. So that's just a clear example of what the MVC architecture is all about. It's more of like splitting certain aspects of a web application into 3 different sections, which is the view, the controller, and then the model. The view strictly handles the user interface, which is what the user sees, while the model strictly deals with the database, everything concerning the database, the logic concerning the database. The model does everything concerning that. Then the controller is just the business logic, the programs that control both. Let's say, for example, a request comes in through the view, the controller takes it, sends it down to the model responds, the controller takes it, sends it down to the view, and the view displays it back for the user to actually see. So features of MVC. It's easy, frictionless, testability, highly testable, extensible, and a pluggable framework. What I'm saying is each of these components, as in your application is actually structured in 3 different layers, which is the model, the view, and then the controller. So you can actually build your applications separately and test them easily. Because without MVC, there are other platforms you can actually, other frameworks you can actually build with, but they are not as structured as the MVC. So you end up, for example, if you were to use, let's say, for example, I'll talk a little bit about ASP.NET. There's a way you build your application if you're not actually using the MVC framework. Your codes, both the user interface, the data code, and your business logic, you all bundle them as one. So it makes it very, very difficult to test an application like that. But once you use the MVC framework, each of these things are separated. So it's easy for you to actually build a particular section, test it, and then ensure that it's okay. You don't mix your codes together. It's easy for you to test. It's easy, and you can easily plug out, like you can easily remove a section. Let's say, for example, you need a particular section of your model. You can easily take it out and use it somewhere else without affecting the rest of your programs. So the other one is it offers full control over your HTML as well as your URLs. What that means is your view is strictly for HTML. So you don't mix up view codes and data codes and business logic and other stuff. You don't mix your codes together. They are all separated. So it's easy for you to manage them. Then you can also leverage existing features provided by ASP.NET, JSP, and Django. Okay, I'll discuss a little bit on that concerning ASP.NET. When it comes to MVC in ASP.NET, there are several technologies in ASP.NET that you also bind with MVC. For example, there's what we call entity framework. I won't go deep into that, but entity framework is actually it's just a framework on ASP.NET that helps you to deal with your data, your model section of your MVC. So you can easily use entity framework when you're actually using MVC. So clear separation of logic. For example, your model, your view, your controller, everything is separated. They are all separated. They are not together. You don't mix these codes together. So it's easy for you to separate your codes. So it's easy for you to work on them. Once, let's say, for example, you have an error and you want to actually, let's say, for example, the error is coming from your data section. You obviously know that it's from the model. So you go straight to the model to solve that. If it's coming from your user interface, you know the error is coming from the view section. So you go straight to the view and deal with that. If it's coming from the controller, like your business logic, you know obviously it's coming from the controller. So you go straight to the controller and deal with it from there. But if you're not using the MVC framework, it's difficult because all these codes are merged together as one. So it's very difficult to actually pick out where your particular error is coming from. Then you have URL routing for search engine optimization, friendly URLs, powerful URLs mapping, and then for comprehension and searchable URLs. MVC is actually good in terms of helping you in terms of URL mapping and then search engine optimization. It helps a lot. It makes it easy for you. For example, you build your app, and the moment you deploy it, it's very easy. Once you go on Google or any of these search apps, you can easily find anything you're looking for from an app that is actually built via MVC. Then support for test-driven development. MVC, you can easily build your apps in different components, and as you're building, you're testing while you're building. So it supports that a lot. But using other frameworks, it's quite difficult because sometimes you have to complete a whole section before you can test. And if you complete a whole section and then you find an error somewhere, it's really difficult to sort it out because you might have, let's say, for example, thousands of codes to sort out from. But using the MVC framework, you build your app bit by bit, and you can easily test these components easily, as in, since you're building the components step by step, you can easily test them as they are all separated. They are not together as one. So we'll discuss the three components of the MVC in details. The view. A view is that part of the application that represents the presentation data. It's just your user interface. Presentation data, that's what you see. As soon as you open a web application, what you see is actually the presentation data. Views are created by the data collected from the model data. A view requests the model to give information that it represents the output presentation to the user. So what I'm saying is, once you open a web application, what you see is actually the view. And you click a button. Let's say, for example, there's a text box where you type a request. Let's say you're searching for something. You type a request, and then you click on submit from that view. What the view does is, as soon as you click on a button, the controller takes that request immediately down to the model. The model retrieves that request, sends it back to the controller, and it forwards it back to the view, which is displayed to the user. So that's what this particular statement is saying. A view requests the model to give information. So the view, what the user sees is the view. He clicks on a button and makes a request. It goes straight to the model via the controller and retrieves that information and displays it back to the user. The view also represents the data from charts, diagrams, and tables. For example, any customer view will include all the UI components like text boxes, drop downs, etc. So a view too can also be charts. Let's say, for example, you have data from your model, that's your database, and you want to actually, and it displays in the form of a chart. You can actually see that via the view. So the view basically is just simply the user interface, when the user opens a particular web application, what that user sees. And then any information he requests, which comes from the model, is also displayed via the view. So the view is more like the window through which you can access the web application and view whatever information you request for. Then the controller. The controller is that part of the application that handles the user interaction. The controller interprets the mouse and keyboard inputs from the user, informing the model and the view to change as appropriate. So basically, this is more like the business logic of your web application. Once a user comes to your web application, he sees the view, he makes a request. It's the controller that takes that request down to the model and then retrieves whatever information the view or the user is requesting for via the controller and sends it back to the view for the user to see. So a controller sends commands to the model to update its state, like saving a specific document. The controller also sends commands to its associated view to change the view's presentation. So all that is saying is the controller simply, whatever the user clicks from the view is a controller that takes that information and then makes a request to the model, that's the data, and whatever is returned, it still sends it back to the view to present it. So the model component stores data and its related logic. So the model component, it's more like your database where data is stored. And then the logic is more like the codes that perform the CRUD functions. That's CRUD, C-R-U-D, create, read, update, and delete. Those are the core functions that you actually carry out on your database. So the model is basically where data is stored and where the logic, that's the codes that perform these CRUD functions, that is where they reside. It represents data that is being transferred between the controller component or any other related business logic. For example, a controller object will retrieve the customer info from the database. It manipulates the data and sends it back to the database or use it to render the same data. For instance, a user makes a request to update his record via the view. That request will be carried via a controller down to the model. And then the data that is supposed to be updated will be retrieved from the model, and certain things will be checked. Let's say, for example, when it comes to data, there are so many things you check for. If someone wants to make an update, there are so many things you check for: data type, you check for data consistency, and so many other stuff. The controller does that and then makes the updates. It sends if maybe all the checks the controller made is actually okay, it sends it back to the model and then the data is updated from there. So it responds to the request from views and also responds to instructions from the controller to update itself. It is also the lowest level of the pattern, which is responsible for maintaining data. So basically, the model is basically your database and the programs or logic that handle the database. So for example, I will talk a little bit about ASP.NET, the model section. If you're using the MVC framework on ASP.NET, there's what we call the entity framework. I think I mentioned it earlier. The entity framework basically helps you to handle your model when using ASP.NET. And basically, you just write your logic. And there are certain things, although I won't go deep into it because it's a bit complex, there are certain things the entity framework will go straight into the database and perform for you. So it makes managing the model very, very easy. But what I would want you to understand basically is the model is strictly your database and the logic that handles your database. And what does this logic do? They perform the CRUD functions. They create, they read, update, and delete. Creating simply means creating a record in that database, like adding a row in that database. Read simply means making a request, reading out a record that already exists on the database. Update simply means updating a record that already exists on the database, and delete simply means removing a record that already exists on the database. So there are popular MVC web frameworks. There are so many frameworks that use MVC. Like you have the Ruby on Rails, the Zen framework, Cogenitor, Laravel, Fuel PHP, and the Symfony, and also ASP.NET too. Like for now, you have I'm more of a .NET developer, so I will talk more on ASP.NET. You have ASP.NET MVC5, which works with Entity Framework 5. And you know, the one thing about MVC is it doesn't really work alone. So whichever framework you're using, there are so many things you still need to learn on how to use before getting to use the MVC framework effectively. So advantages of MVC: easy code maintenance and easy to extend and grow. What that means is you can easily maintain your code. You have your model, you have your view, and you have your controller. They are all separated. The view strictly deals with your user interface. The model strictly deals with your database and the logic that handles those the core database functions. And then the controller, which is the business logic. They are all separated. So it's very easy for you to maintain your code. If you want to do something concerning your model, you just go to the model section, which is like a folder. You just go to the model folder, pick out what you want to work on, and work on it. But if you're not using the MVC framework, these three components are normally merged together as one. So it makes it very difficult to maintain your program. So that's one of the major advantages of MVC. It structures your application into 3 different components. So it's easy for you to just pick one section, work on it, pick any other section, it's just easy for you. But if you're to use other frameworks, they merge everything together. They merge the user interface, that's basically your HTML codes. They merge the controller, which is basically your C# codes and classes. Then they merge the model, which is still a little bit of C#, and then your SQL codes. So everything is merged together as one. So it makes it very difficult to debug, like if there's an error, to pick out that error and sort it out. It makes it very, very difficult. Then the second one is MVC model component can be tested separately from the user. What that means is you can separately test your model without the controller or the view. But if you're to use other frameworks, you cannot do that. You have to, as in you run them as one. But if you're using MVC, you can easily just test your controller without the model or the view. They are all separate. Then the next one is easier support for new type of clients. Easier support for new types of clients. A client basically talks about a browser. Like a browser is your client, which makes a request, like client server. If you guys have heard about the client server stuff, your client is what makes a request to the server responds back. So MVC can support new clients in the sense that it can easily interact with any client. It could be a new browser, it could be from a mobile app, as in like a mobile phone, a browser from a mobile phone. It can easily structure itself to work with these clients. Then development of various components can be performed parallelly. That's, you can develop you can develop these different components separately. For example, you could have you have a development team with 4 to 5 programmers working. One can be working on the view simultaneously with the person working on the controller, with the person another person working on the model. They can be doing these things simultaneously. So that's the advantage of MVC. If you're to use other frameworks, you have to wait for whoever is working on the view to finish before you now move to the data side or the business logic side of it. So it makes it difficult and it delays. But if you're using MVC, you can just do your thing separately. One person is working on the view, the other person on the controller, and the other one dealing with the model. So it makes your work very fast and very, very flexible. Then it helps to avoid complexity of dividing an application into the three units. Okay. Before MVC came out, there's a way as a developer I could break my application into these same three units. I actually did that on my own without the MVC framework, but it doesn't give you that. It's so complex doing it because you have to build separate folders, and then in these folders you have to start adding so much logic to this folder. So it makes it very difficult breaking your application into these three tiers. But with MVC, everything is made easy, as in everything is easy to do. It only uses a front controller pattern which process web application requests through a single controller. So basically, any request coming from the client or coming from the view is processed by a controller. And when building an application, let's say, for example, building an application that is slightly complex, you have a lot of controllers, and each of these controllers perform certain tasks. They respond to certain requests from the view. For example, you click a button from your view to get certain data for you. It picks a particular controller, and it's that controller that will now carry out that transaction, send it down to the model, and then bring it back. So basically what it does is there's a controller that picks the right controller to handle a particular request. It offers the best support for test-driven development. So in terms of building and testing your application, I think MVC is actually the best in terms of you build each of these components, you build, you test, you build, and you test. So it makes it very easy. You don't have to build everything before testing. You can be building these components separately and be testing them independently. You can test the model independently of the controller or the view. It works well for web apps, which are supported by large teams of web designers and developers. I think I discussed something like that earlier, where if you have a team working on a web application, they can easily, the designers are doing the view, the programmers are doing the controller, and other programmers too be doing the view, the model side of it. So everybody can just be working on these separate units and then testing it independent of each other person. Then they provide clean separation of concerns. Everything is separated. View is separated. Model is separate from the controller. So it makes it very easy. And then search engine optimization friendly. It's very easy. Once you build a web application using MVC, it's very easy for search engines to easily pick out whatever the, let's say, user is requesting for. All classes and objects are independent of each other so that you can test them separately. That's the core of MVC. Everything is separated in MVC. Everything can be tested independent of every other section. Let's say, for example, you can test your model without even seeing the view. You can test the controller without the view. Then MVC allows logical grouping of related actions on a controller together. So you can actually, like, what you call an action when it comes to in programming, it's more like your logic, your codes, your methods, which perform a certain task. So you can actually group related actions or related methods under a particular controller. That's a bit complex, but I will still, as we go further or as you ask questions, I would explain that more. Then, disadvantages of using MVC. MVC is actually difficult to read, change, unit test, and reuse this model. Though it's difficult because it's difficult to reuse certain parts of MVC in the sense that most of them are actually customized for a particular application which you're building. So if you're building a new application, it's not easy to actually pull out a certain unit and transfer to the new application which you're actually using, which you're actually building. So it's quite difficult to reuse certain units of MVC. The framework navigation can be complex sometimes as it introduces new layers of abstraction, which requires users to adapt to the decomposition criteria of MVC. You know, like I said, MVC involves a lot, depending on which framework you actually use. You have to learn a lot, and then the framework is a bit from one, as in navigating from one step to another can be a little bit complex because there are certain, you need to learn new technologies. If you're going to use ASP.NET, you need to learn entity framework. You need to learn so many other stuff involved in using MVC. No formal validation support. Validation simply means when you have from your view, you have input controls for input, let's say your text boxes. When you put a particular text box and let's say, for example, you say first name, you validate that text box to ensure that the user actually enters first name and not a number. So MVC does not formally support validation. So if you're going to do validation, like if you're going to validate your data, you have to do that on your own. But if you're going to use other frameworks, like for example, ASP.NET Web Forms, they already have built-in support for validation, but MVC doesn't do that. So you have to write the logic via the controller yourself. Then increased complexity and inefficiency of data. The truth is MVC can be a little bit complex. And if your data is not validated, automatically, if your inputs are not validated, automatically that data cannot be relied upon. The data is unreliable. So MVC can be a little bit complex, but if you get to the point of learning it and using it very well, you will appreciate it at the end of the day because it makes everything work well for you at the end. The difficulty of using MVC with modern user interface. To an extent, MVC, for example, I will talk about ASP.NET. When you're building your view, which is the user interface, you create a model, and the model, your view, basically, mostly your view is tied to a particular model. So sometimes when building, it doesn't really comply in terms of, let's say you build a web application that fits to a particular model. If you're trying to convert it, let's say for a mobile user interface, you have to go the extra mile to get that done. So it's quite difficult when working with modern user interfaces because, let's say, for example, if you're building a particular application that needs to conform with a web and then mobile and several platforms which you might want to view the user interface, you have to go the extra mile to ensure it fits into all these platforms, all these interfaces.
Hello, Sloma. Yeah.
There is need.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, hello?
Yeah, can you just summarize this bit, please?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just rush to the end because most of the things I've actually said them before. So knowledge of multiple technologies is required. Like I said, MVC, you might need to learn other, let's say if you're using ASP.NET, you need to learn things like entity framework and stuff. So you need to learn other technologies to really work with MVC. Then maintenance of lots of codes in the controller. The controller does a lot of jobs, so you have thousands of codes within the controller, so you have to maintain all that. So 3-tier architecture versus MVC architecture. Initially, I talked about building your own application via 3-tier. Like you could separate your applications using folders, your data, presentation layer, and then the business logic, which is a 3-tier architecture. Then there's MVC, which is the model, view, controller. It's almost the same thing. So it's just the differences here. It's just a simple comparison between the two. The 3-tier type of architecture pattern never communicates directly with the data layer, but the MVC communicates directly using the triangular topology, which is the model, view, controller. Then the 3-tier, widely used in web applications where the client, data tiers, and the middleware is run physically on separate platforms. Then the MVC, generally used on applications that run on a single graphical workstation. So it's just a little comparison between the 3-tier architecture and the MVC. So from here, I think MVC is preferable for anyone to pick than the 3-tier architecture can be very complex. So to summarize everything, the MVC is an architectural pattern that separates an application into a model, view, and then the controller. The model includes all your data, your database, your data, and then the logic that handles all the primary data functions like the CRUD function. Then the view, that's your presentation layer, your presentation data, handles everything concerning user interaction, your user interface, while the controller is an interface between the model and the view components. MVC is a highly testable, extensible, plug and pluggable framework. Some popular MVC frameworks are Rails, that's Ruby on Rails, Zend framework, Congenital, Laravel, Fuel PHP, and then ASP.NET MVC. So, thank you. Any question?
Thank you, Solomon.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Yes, I have the first question.
Okay.
When you were on the slide where we have the database, I saw some 011001100101. You know, I don't know what that means. And you know, when we watch metrics, you see that 01100101 or only 1 and zeros. You know.
Okay.
So what for clarity and for other people's help as well, what does that mean?
Basically, everything you key into the computer is converted to zeros and ones. So that's basically what the computer understands. If you type A or you type something, it is converted to zeros and ones. So the computer will know how to merge these zeros and ones, and then it will understand exactly what you've sent, what you've keyed into it. So that's just the computer language. If you type A doesn't go into the computer. It's 0 and 1s. It goes in a particular pattern, which the computer can easily understand and interpret.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Solomon.
Yeah. Hi. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Yeah, my Dizila is on the line. Thank you for the presentation. It was very educative. But I just need a few things to clarify from your presentation.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one is, you said one of the main benefits of the MVC is to you can separately test the sections. Yes. Yeah. And then in the disadvantage, you say it can be difficult to test and to do unit testing as well, which to me sounds a bit conflicting.
Okay. No,
so if you can help me to clarify that.
Okay. Yeah. Major benefit. It's a benefit, but it's not easy to do. It actually, it gives you, it's easy, it makes it easy for you to test these components separately, they are independent of each other. The model, the view, and the controller, they are independent. You can pick your model and test it. Then one of the disadvantages, I said it's a bit difficult to test these components. What I mean by being difficult in the sense that, like I said, using MVC involves learning so many other technologies. So going that line to learn entity framework, learn this and that, and then learn how to run migrations. If you come to, I'll just divert a little bit through ASP.NET. That's what you call migrations. You also learn how to do all these things when using MVC on ASP.NET. So why I said it's difficult in the sense that you have to go the extra mile to learn some of these technologies. But like I said at the end, when you get to learn it, you appreciate the benefits of getting to use MVC.
Thanks.
Okay, can I ask you one other question as well, yeah? Which is,
okay, yeah.
This is again is more of clarification again, yeah. Thank you for your response. The other one is, you said, I understand that the controller picks it up from the view section and then takes it to the model, which is the database. What I just need you to clarify is, you may have touched on it, is that at any point in time, can you have a situation whereby the model communicates directly with the view section or not?
Yes, the model can actually communicate directly to the view. So it depends on which framework you're using. Now, I'll clue you in through ASP.NET MVC. You could build your application. You are the one designing the controller. You could actually, the controller can actually take a request from the view, send it down to the model. Now, there are certain transactions you might want to perform from the model. Let's say, for example, if the model sends a data, you might want to use your controller to validate that data that is coming from the model before it is presented to the view. But if you don't need your controller to perform certain validations, you can actually send your data straight from the model down to the view. But if it's passing through the controller might just perform certain checks or just data refining. It can refine the data before it takes it down to the view. But if none of this is going to happen, the model can easily communicate straight to the view and present your data. So it depends on how you decide to build it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? I hope the BAs here specifically, you understand the implication of your requirement as well. When we did the use case diagram, did view, search for products, extend relationship, process flow diagrams, where all of the business logic will be created. And for the PMs and the testers as well, I know we didn't do some demo. I thought we'll do some demo, like when we go to a web browser and you make a request, you can see the post put that we covered when we did APIs. Basically, when you go to your web browser like Facebook, which is the view, and you create a new post, the controller will take that post and store it in the model, which is a database. That's why each time you go back to your profile, you can see all of the items you've posted, but it's basically the view making a request through the controller to get your data and present it to you the way they want to present it. And I think Slomo, it will make a little sense to touch a little on the different languages for the view, for the controller, and for the database. We know SQL, we know HTML, CSS. So which languages do they use for each of these different layers? Briefly, please.
Okay. The view, basically you use your HTML, like your hypertext markup language. That's what you use in generating your view. And HTML is basically made up of tags. And each of these tags represents certain components on your view. So if you're talking about the view, it's basically HTML. Now, if you're talking about the controller is just a business logic.
Sorry, what about CSS?
Yeah, okay. You are not just HTML, you talk about CSS too, but CSS is basically for styling. CSS means cascading style sheet. That is what gives your view the colors you see or the positioning. And you just use it to style your view. And then you have things like JavaScript, jQuery. There are certain web applications or websites you open and then you see images sliding, moving, scrolling. Those things are being performed by by your JavaScript or jQuery, and these are client side. Let me explain something for you. When you talk about HTML, CSS, JavaScript, jQuery, they run on the client. Run on the client simply means your browser can easily interpret them. They don't need any server resource for them to work. So that is your view section. They can run, the browser is designed to interpret everything from your CSS to your JavaScript to your HTML. The browser can actually do that. You don't need to send any request down to the server. So that's why it's called client-side development, which is your view. Then when you move,
before you continue, sorry. Okay. When we talk about client-side, I want people to have an understanding. Please, do we understand what we say when it says client-side? Do we understand what it means? If you,
it's not very clear. It's not very clear.
Okay. So now your client side here, it is your laptop or your mobile phone or your tablet. All right. Now the apps on your laptop, your mobile phone, your tablet, like your browser, your Chrome is a client. Your IE Edge, those are client. All right. So because they reside on your side, you as a user of a website, you are also a client that is trying to have a service from that website. So all of these apps on your own machines are called client. They make a request to the server, which is the business, which is owned by the business. Let's say Facebook, for instance, their servers, wherever their servers is located, yeah, you have your mobile phone, you have your client, the app of Facebook on your phone, and you make requests on their server. So you are the client, the app on your phones, they are all clients. Okay, let's just make that as basic as possible.
Okay.
Make sense now?
It makes sense, but David, let me just ask this question. Maybe it will be clearer to most of us. So if we are the clients and most of these applications or web browsers and all of that are clients, would you say the view is like the front office? And which one will act as the back office in this case? Is it the controller?
No.
So a client goes to the front office to ask for something. Let's say we want to revisit a post we posted 2 years ago. So the client access to this particular post, and the front office staff, in this case, which is the view, goes to get it from the server. I don't know how I'm going to explain this. So the view gets this thing from the view gets this thing from the server through the controller, right? I don't know how I'm going to explain this.
Can I just jump in? Sorry, it's Paul speaking.
Yeah, Paul,
if you think of the controller as a shop assistant in a shoe shop, you are the end customer. So you are the web browser. You're the customer. You want to go into a shoe shop and buy some shoes. So you go in and you see a sales assistant, and you ask that sales assistant to give you a pair of shoes in your size. And that shop assistant, and everyone can correct me if I'm off topic here or wrong, that shop assistant is the controller that goes to the back end, to the source or the database, whatever, to retrieve a pair of shoes that you have desired to try on in your size. And then that then passes it back to you as the customer or the client in this case. So when David is saying that,
the shop assistant in this case is, are we going to call the shop assistant the view?
No, hold on. Like the front Paul made mention of two people there. All right, so there are two different people. The person that attends to you first. Have you been to JD Sport? Who has been to JD Sport here? I think that would be a classical example. Who has been to JD Sport? You know, when you go to JD Sport, they have all of their shoes in their store. All right, you go and speak to someone. That person will make a call to the people in the store. They will check for it and then send it back to the person who then presents it back to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is basically what it is. But I think the best way is to use restaurant, which is the waiter, the chef, okay, and you sit down, which is like the front office, which is the client. As a client, you go into the restaurant, you sit down, wait. Then the waiter will come, ask for your request, what you want. Then they take that and take it to the kitchen. The kitchen will now prepare it and send it back to you. So the waiter is the controller, okay? The kitchen is the model, and you going into the restaurant, you are the view, all right? But going back to your own example, I don't want to beat about this thing too much. Like a corporate organization, when you go to the front office, yes, when you go to the front office, those guys that are there, but if you use the corporate organization, it's very hard. Yeah, it's very hard to use that as an example because you just have that reception. But if we take the receptionist as the controller, because they will be the one to send information back to the back office for your request. You want to come and see somebody in the office. You walk in as a client. All right, you are the client this time around. So you are the browser per se. All right, you are the Chrome or whatever. You walk in and make requests through the receptionist, who is the controller, because they can either let you in or not. All right, and then get the person that you come to see from the back office.
Okay. I think this example helps to clarify things a lot, because most of us have just been hearing vocabularies that are beyond us. So I guess it's very clear now.
Yeah, that's why I have to bring back this point. All right.
Thank you very much.
No worries. So, Solomon, so I think we've touched on both server. Okay, you're talking about the languages. So the controller languages now. Just try and make it brief.
Okay, the controller. It depends on which of the frameworks you're using. For me, I use .NET, so I use C# for my controllers. You can actually, under the .NET framework, you have programming languages like C#, you have the Visual Basic .NET, you have the JHash. So you can actually use that to actually build your controller. And basically, if you're building your controller using this, you use what you call the object-oriented programming. I won't go there. I won't go that far. It's a bit complex. So down to your model section, you also use
before you round up there. So there are other languages, because you used to hear Java, C# as Solomon has called, PHP, Ruby. I think even JavaScript now also performs some of the controller stuff. If you're using one of these their framework, I've forgotten their framework as well. All right. So these are all these languages. There's this popular one now for database that we use. What is it again? Whenever you're doing data analysis, Paul, help me out. All right, continue. But those are some of the controller languages.
Okay.
Right? Solomon,
sorry, you're talking about SQL.
SQL.
No, not
SQL.
No, that's backend. That's data. I'm talking about code logic. The other one. Solomon, just continue. I'll remember it. Python.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe a lot of people are ahead of Python.
Yeah,
you know, yeah, it's very popular these days. So although it's been there forever, it's one of those controller languages. Yeah.
Okay.
Then the backend database language, Solomon.
Yeah, the database, that's your model now. What you use in your model, you basically use you still use C#. As for me, you can also use your C# at the back end.
Yep, true.
That's your back end logic. You can use your C#, you can use your PHP, you can use your Python, you can use Visual Basic .NET, you can use Java, whatever. But you have to combine it with SQL. That's what you call SQL statements, because the SQL statements are the ones that's the statement that interacts directly with the database. So you have to combine the two, because the SQL text gives you direct access to perform the CRUD functions like create, read, update, and delete. So those are just the languages you use at the model section of your MVC framework. So any question?
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Hello, good evening. It's Sulukade Ali speaking.
Okay.
My own question is very simple. It doesn't have anything to do with the information disseminated so far. But what my question is based upon is all these things you have mentioned to us, the languages and everything so far. All these languages, are they going to be put in practice for us to learn, or we're just getting the information, but it's not actually, to me, it's not helping in a way of practicalization?
Okay.
You've just given me all the information, but I don't know what I'm learning.
Yeah, great. Paul, do you want to answer that, or I should answer it? This is the reason of TechTalk, basically. So, okay, kind of. Yeah. So, Olukayode.
Yep.
The reason for this TechTalk is for us to introduce you guys to technical stuff, so that in the future, when you are working with the developers, you can communicate with them. All right. We are not trying to make you a developer. We are not.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
Okay, we are not trying to make you a developer, but that's why it's called TechTalk Monday.
Okay.
Yeah. So the essence is to get you to become a little bit familiar with this technology.
An overview of.
Yeah, there are some project managers, there are some business analysts that were developers before, so they know all of these things. We want to help increase your marketability.
All right.
All right.
Okay.
And when you start working in the field, these things will not be foreign to you.
All right.
Okay. Paul, go on.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, David's right with that. It's just to make sure that when you're sitting in the conversation with a room of technical people, that you do have some sense of understanding of what they're referring to, what they're talking about. It also makes it a bit easier if you need to note a keyword down, that you can go and look that up with a bit more confidence.
All right. I understand now. It's just for us to be able to. I understand. All right.
Paul has touched on the point, keywords there, because when you get into the job, you start hearing some languages that people are speaking, and if you're not familiar with them, you get thrown away. Understand me? So we don't want that to happen.
All right.
Yeah, and we're not just focusing on purely what you've come here to learn, but we are a fully digital training company. So what we do is that we try to give you as much information as possible to get you out there to succeed.
All right.
And the other advantages with these sort of talks, often we get a request on a particular subject based on what has been discussed today, so that we can build another talk around that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So.
Yes. Thank you, Paul. That's
okay.
That's understanding. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Waiting for questions.
If there is no more question, I think this has been another successful Tech Talk. So for information reason, we hold this Tech Talk once every month, the first Monday of the month. Okay. So I think at this point I might just put out some announcement which I made on Friday.